Hey everybody, Ty here. Sorry this video is going up so late. I haven't been feeling well throughout the day, but we're trying to push through. Hopefully you guys get to see this video if I don't keep messing up. But anyway, here is the situation. There is a lot going on right now. So in case anyone might have missed it, we talked about Tropical Storm Chantal before it made landfall, and then overnight or early this morning, somewhere around 2 to 4 a.m. I don't remember the exact time at the moment, but Chantal made landfall here as a tropical storm with 50-mile-per-hour winds. It did produce a couple of tornadoes earlier today in North Carolina. Outside of that, I haven't heard too much down the grapevine in regards to flooding reports. Damage at this point has been relatively minor. However, we still will be dealing with the effects of Chantal and its remnants as it continues to push off to the north and east and head into the mid-Atlantic. The flood threat from this storm does begin to drop off as we head into tomorrow, thankfully. You'll see that on the bottom left corner here. So what you'll see there is we do have the slight risk for today, and then also, of course, I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about what's going on in Texas, unfortunately. The flooding there has been very significant and unfortunately very tragic. And fortunately today there is also a slight risk over there as well. Thankfully, as we get into tomorrow, the risk does drop off to a marginal risk, which has at least a 5% chance of flash flooding, which is better than the 15, but still, any rainfall over these areas where we've already had excessive rainfall is not a good thing at all. If you look over to the east here, though, where we have the remnants of Chantal, you can see that we also have a marginal risk there as well. So the chances are still there, but they're a little bit lower. And we're going to be slowly but surely kind of progressing towards a phase where both of these areas will begin to dry out just a little bit, at least in the short term. As you see the day 3 risk, some good news is on the horizon for those of us in central Texas here. It does look like the excessive rainfall forecaster does not have any sort of risk over towards areas like Austin, Houston, and San Antonio at this point. Still need to be on guard, but it does look like we're finally getting towards the back half of this ordeal that we've been going through over here. So that being said, we'll also of course take a look at our severe weather risk. We have a slight risk for severe weather today. Storms are ongoing right now. We did get one tornado over here towards Colorado and a decent amount of hail and wind reports up to this point. The storms are still ongoing and still have plenty of steam to go with them. So we actually also have a tornado warning that's ongoing at the time of me doing this video as well. So between that and the severe thunderstorm warnings, it's a pretty busy night here. Now I really want you to pay attention to this enhanced risk here. This is where things really kind of get interesting. We have a 30% wind threat, and it also has the hatch risk attached to it. So there is a good chance that we could see winds greater than 70 miles an hour within this region tomorrow. If all goes well, if I can get better, I will be live to cover this. At least that's what the plan is. We'll see what other factors could play into it, but I should be able to stream this. We also do have a 5% tornado threat here as well. So one of those days where all hazards is definitely possible. Thankfully, as we go forward, we drop down to a marginal risk in the meantime. But we will still be on guard. Nothing in particular that I would be concerned with at this point in time. But as we go forward, though, into day 5, we have a new slight risk that pops up here. And we're looking at the central Dakotas here, and then also looking at north central parts of Nebraska once again. At this point, I'm concerned mainly about damaging winds over here. Of course, other hazards could be possible with this, but with this setup, typically given the time of year, we usually are more concerned about damaging winds. We'll kind of get into the details of that momentarily here. So, of course, one other thing I'm going to take a quick little look at and briefly discuss with you guys, of course, Chantal. Chantal is continuing to weaken. It won't be long before we see the final advisory. In fact, this is the final advisory. This just came in not long ago. So the Weather Prediction Center, of course, will be taking over coverage on this from this point forward because, of course, it'll be remaining a flood threat. But nothing really to make note of at this point. Chantal is pretty much a done deal. So again, we'll see this progress off to the north and then eventually move east here. So do need to be watchful over here towards North Carolina and parts of Virginia, maybe over towards Maryland as well, DC area, of course. But as far as the worst of the impacts here, that's real. As far as like the worst impacts here, I think that's just about it. Just really rain at this point. There is a small chance that you could get a tropical tornado, but it's becoming more and more unlikely by the minute here, truthfully. So let's go ahead, take a look at the model data, and we're going to jump right ahead to tomorrow, and we're going to get a look at our risk here. So we have the enhanced risk in effect here. We're looking at the GFS and the Euro, since this is a little bit more of a critical day. Not necessarily a high-end day, but something that we do need to pay closer attention to. So a couple things I've made note of here. We're seeing some decent model agreement, not complete model agreement between the GFS and the Euro, but good confidence there that we have a nice little trough that tries to develop here. Nothing stout, no mega trough or anything like that. A lot of the influence here really is going to be more so shortwave based. So we're going to be looking at the mid levels of the atmosphere. But you can still see it though. You can see a sign of diffluence popping up right here in the GFS, much more profoundly than on the Euro, but even so you still see a signal here as well. We're going to move both of these up one frame, and you can see the signal become a little bit more pronounced on the GFS, of course. With the Euro, it's not quite as pronounced, but still see a relatively similar signal. This really shows itself better in the mid levels of the atmosphere. We have the mid levels already in that same exact time frame here. You see a short wave that pops up right over here towards south central Nebraska. And then you see two short waves pop up over here on the GFS towards south central Nebraska and southern Nebraska, and then a second one that pops up over here towards South Dakota and then over towards northern Nebraska. So a couple extra interesting parameters with this. There's a little bit of discrepancy here, but for the most part, it's pretty much academic, I would say, at this point. Both of these models have the are showing the potential for severe weather to pop up, mainly in what I would expect to be a line of strong to severe thunderstorms, mainly capable of producing damaging winds. I would think that maybe earlier in the day would be when we would see that tornado threat, and we'll actually go ahead and take a look at that low-level jet. And this is where things kind of get a tad bit on the messier side, I would say, at this point, is because GFS and the Euro, with those short waves being in different positions here, it does kind of affect how that low-level jet kind of pans out on each model. So with the GFS, the short wave's a little bit closer towards south and west central parts of Nebraska, and as a result, we see that low-level jet kind of lagging off over here to the southwest. And it's at this point where I would say that the best potential for all parameters to come together for tornadoes exist. Now, if we go ahead and look over to the Euro, low-level jet isn't quite as persistent here, and then also the short wave, the point of focus is much further off to the east. So kind of an interesting situation that pops up here. There are a couple sneaky areas right here, but this will ultimately determine, well, I wouldn't say it determines, but I would say that it would ultimately decide just whether or not we even get a tornado threat, and just where it will end up is depending on where this short wave ends up firing off these storms. Further off to the east, I would lean more towards the wind threat. Off to the west, I think there's a better chance of tornadoes here. So let's go ahead and go back to the 500 millibar map here. We'll take the Euro off from this point forward here, because we're so far out of range after this point that there's really not much to latch on to, I would say. So if we keep it moving here, you'll see that trough kind of clear out, and as a result, we'll start to see this ridge begin to build in, and this is going to actually take away from our severe weather chances as we go further along here after this trough moves through on Thursday. This trough, I think, also will have a very similar look to it. There's a small chance that this goes up to an enhanced risk. I wouldn't expect it to go any further beyond that point, I would say. But with this, after this point, the setup becomes pretty zonal here. And what I mean by zonal is, if you look at the jet stream, how it's straight like this is zonal. with this, severe weather potential isn't impossible, but it's a lot less likely. You're not going to get one of those big time setups that we were seeing in spring or early summer. So with that, we'll have more isolated opportunities, but you're not going to see any big high-end risk days or anything of the sort here. Now, as we go further along here, interesting thing to make note of, looks like we try to get a little bit of action as we get past the middle part of the month here, heading towards the 19th and the 20th. And then from that point onward, we're kind of back and forth here. We see a big ridge beginning to try and develop over here towards the central part of the U.S. and maybe even start to factor in for the eastern states. Now, big parameter, of course, when it comes to severe weather is, of course, the dew points. And I mean, do I really need to say it at this point? If you've been watching over the last couple of months here, we've talked about how the Gulf moisture has been running rampant and continues to do so. And if we're being honest, nothing's really changed here. I mean, there's plenty of moisture surging off to the central states here, right around where those troughs are kind of propagating. My pronunciation's horrible today. Feel free to grill me in the comments for it. I'm just kidding, don't. But either way, no matter how you look at it, severe weather potential looks like it's going to be a big deal going forward across the northern states. Maybe even towards the Midwest, but I would say that if you're over towards the Dakotas, maybe the Western High Plains, that's going to be your point of interest. Now, we're going to also take a look, of course, at the temperatures, because with that ridge that we're going to be seeing building in as we progress further through the month, that is going to have a major effect on what it feels like outside, combined with those dew points too, especially if you're an outdoor worker like myself, because outside, you can't run from it. You feel the humidity, you feel the heat, those heat indexes go up, and it can get pretty dangerous sometimes. So if you do happen to be working outside, especially out towards the southwest or anywhere towards the central plains, definitely would urge you to pre-hydrate at night. Definitely could save your skin, figuratively and literally. But as you can see here, we're starting to get those triple digits popping up towards the central states, and we're getting into the 110s over here towards the southwest. So piping hot weather. It's the dog days of summer. We know what's coming when we get into this time of year. As we continue to go further and further along here, you can see those hundreds remain pretty persistent here, along with the 90s as well. Before all is said and done, I do see a couple areas even towards the valleys over here in California getting into the 110s here. I even think I just saw 116. In fact, there it is right there. So that just lets you know the heat is on. You know what time of year it is. I don't really need to say too much going forward here. So 90s, of course, are going to be persistent across the deep south over here and heading into the mid-Atlantic. So it's going to be hot, just to let you know, in the short term and really into the long term, as much as I hate to say it. But if there's anywhere right now that I would say is the nicest, it would definitely be over towards the northeast and extreme northwest, where the temperatures are a little bit cooler. We're dealing with more of those 60s and 70s and 80s over there. And this is going to pretty much be a prominent thing throughout, I would say, just about the entire month. Now, getting back to the severe weather side of things, we're going to, of course, be looking at the energy that we have available. In particular, we're going to be focusing on these areas right here. But if you do happen to see your area with anything past this blue color right here, definitely might want to raise an eyebrow there. Because wherever thunderstorms are possible, where you have those areas of yellow and red here, means there might be a chance that you might get a marginally severe storm. Mainly damaging winds and hail would be the main threat if it were to come to fruition. But unless you have other parameters to go along with this, usually not a whole lot to really be concerned with. Now again, as I mentioned before, most of the energy seems to dominantly be out towards the northern plains states, especially as we get into Wednesday and Thursday here. In fact, let's go back to that real quick, because that energy is almost off the charts here. To put it in perspective for anyone that's a little bit newer around here, what I'm looking at here is instability. Usually about 500 joules per kilogram, which is really this area in the gray, is enough to get severe weather potential. Once you get into the blue, you have considerable severe potential. Once you get into the yellows and the oranges, where you're at 2,000 to 3,000 joules per kilogram on Cape, that is a pretty explosive environment. Once you get into the pink, that's just a powder keg just waiting to go off. If the storms can take advantage of that, they can produce just about any hazard here, really. So definitely need to be watchful there. Wouldn't be so concerned about necessarily a tornado threat with this, I would say, at this point. But I do think damaging wind potential will be the leading threat. This is that day 5 slight risk that we were talking about before. Again, we'll say that I would rule out tornadoes, but again, I'm saying damaging winds will probably reign supreme here. Those storms will most likely be forming on top of each other with the amount of energy that's available there. And then even on the days after, while nothing has been highlighted as, okay, this is going to be a slight risk or anything like that, I would say that with the amount of energy available, there still may be some extra days with severe weather potential, just like we mentioned earlier. Usually when you have that much energy and a trough associated with it, usually you'll get something out of it. Maybe not the most insane weather, but you will get something considerable possibly out of it. And like I said, the energy just continues to remain abundant across anywhere east of the Rockies at this point as we go further throughout the model run here. So a lot to keep track of in the days ahead here. And it's really not going to be well recognized probably until the back end of the event, until the back end of the day, or maybe the morning of said day for severe weather potential. So let's go ahead and take a final look at what the precipitation looks like. And anyone in Texas, the exact time when your rain will finally come to an end, we'll see this map clear up. I have good news and bad news. It does end, and that's the good news, but it really doesn't let up completely to where we don't even have a green speck until Wednesday, really Thursday after that. That Gulf moisture is trying its best to be persistent, but finally we get some clearing by the time we get towards the back half of the week. So while rain chances are going to steadily drop, I know for a fact that we won't be dry for sure until about Wednesday, Thursday, definitely into Friday. After that point, it does look like we get a pretty decent break. We get at least several days before we start seeing some green specks on the map again. But even so, the coverage is not anywhere near as significant as what we were dealing with previously. So I know it's not the greatest news in the world, but we got to take our victories where we can get them. So again, as I mentioned before, we're going to backtrack here. This is the remnants of Chantal. We'll watch this pretty much dissipate over the mid-Atlantic. And then, of course, we'll watch our severe weather setup take shape here as we get into the afternoon tomorrow. After that point, we'll watch that line of storms pretty much dissipate. Our next severe threat is Thursday afternoon, Thursday evening. Storms look like they're going to initiate late in the evening. This favors a setup a little further to the south than GFS does in this case. We'll have to see if we see any shifts in the track of that trough as we go further throughout the day here. And then after that point, with the amount of energy that we have available towards these regions, it wouldn't surprise me if we end up getting a slight risk later down the line over towards the Midwest and maybe even towards the deep south, depending on how these storms organize over here towards Mississippi and Louisiana here. But it's not uncommon to see those kind of pop up on the day of. So as we continue to move forward here, the amount of energy that we have in the atmosphere, any sort of troughs that come in over here towards the deep south, it's going to result in some kind of rain chance. Like I said, severe weather chances are a little bit more unknown, especially when you get these low pressure areas to pop up here. Just about anything can still be possible. So then as we go further along here, we still continue to see plenty of activity east of the Rockies at this point. With that ridging that's out towards the west, it's going to keep things relatively quiet for the most part. Over towards the desert southwest, in spite of those hot temperatures, especially if you're east of the desert regions, monsoon season is still in effect here. I mean, it's not necessarily going to be 115 over here, but it's still going to be 90 and stormy. So beware of the humidities as well. But that's pretty much gonna be it here. This is pretty much how the pattern is looking in the short to medium range at this point. We'll be taking a little bit of a closer look at the long range as we go a little bit later into the week here, but first we got to get through these severe weather setups. But that being said, appreciate you guys all being here. Hope you had a wonderful holiday weekend, and I will see you guys tomorrow. You guys take care.